Welcome back to Inside City Hall. June is historically the time when budget negotiations heat up between the mayor and the city council. Talks that at times over the last 2 decades have turned very acrimonious. But this year, with a new Democratic mayor and a new city council speaker, the process, commonly referred to as the budget dance, has taken on a different flavor, often one of consensus. But there's still much to sift through and work out in the proposed $74 billion budget. So joining me now to talk more about it, we've got 4 leading city council members. Queens Councilman Jimmy Van Bramer is the council's majority leader. Brooklyn Councilman David Greenfield also chairs the Land Use Committee. Manhattan Councilwoman Margaret Chin leads the Committee on Aging. And from the Bronx, we have Councilman Richie Torres, a freshman who chairs the council's Public Housing Committee. Thank you all for being here. Good to see you. And let me start by asking, is the budget dance really over? Are there just a couple of items like the firehouses and the senior centers that aren't in the mix, but otherwise it's the same sort of back and forth? What's new this year?
Well, I think it is over for the most part. I think a lot of really important things have been baselined, like libraries, like culturals. There are so many things that were baselined that are important to all New Yorkers, and we are not talking about saving firehouses or saving libraries. We're actually talking about ways to add things to the budget that would be meaningful, progressive for this moment in New York City. That's different than what I've experienced as a council member, and I think that most New Yorkers have experienced.
In a way, though, you have less to trade, right? I mean, in the past, you could sort of bargain with different numbers and different levels of support for things that were on the chopping block. With a lot of things off the chopping block, now it's either, for instance, you either get 1,000 cops or you don't, right?
Well, I think there's a lot more in terms of looking at what the mayor called a progressive budget, that we can really talk about increasing funding for some vital program, like programs for senior citizens. That's been really decimated in the last couple of years. So it is really a great opportunity to fight for more funding for programs that are important to us.
Well, let me go back to the 1,000 cops. Is that something that is sort of a vitally felt need, or is it sort of a good idea and you're going to end up with some number somewhere between 0 and 1,000?
I think it's a very strong feeling among the council that it's certainly very important. And if you've been listening to many of my colleagues, especially those in the outer boroughs, including our chair, Vanessa Gibson, they insist that crime is going up in their neighborhoods and that one of the key indicators is a lack of police resources on the street. So that's something that's important. And so I think we're still dancing, we're just not dancing as much. And remember, of course, we're all friends over here, right? We're all Democrats, we're on the same side, we're on the same team, and I think that really takes away much of the acrimony. We're having, as Jimmy said, an honest conversation about the important issues and try to figure out what really are the most important priorities.
And where does policing fit in your district, Richie?
Well, there's a pressing need. I represent a piece of the 47th precinct, which has seen a spike in violence. So some of the most pronounced increases in crime we've seen in the Bronx. And of course, I'm, as the chair of public housing, even though public housing houses about 5% of the city, it accounts for 1/5 of all violent crime in the city. And so we've seen an epidemic of street crew violence. You had the tragic stabbing of a 6-year-old child, a fatal stabbing in Boulevard houses in East New York. And there's a real need for not only police officers on the ground, but for enhanced security in public housing.
Well, I know this is your first trip to the budget, the budget process as a council member, but I've also seen where you pointed out that there are many millions of dollars that have been allocated for security in public housing that just haven't been spent. What's going to be your priority as we go through this budget process yet again? I mean, do you add more money to it, or do you try to get the old money spent? What's going to happen?
Well, there are 2 issues here. We have to ensure that the dollars are spent promptly. But keep in mind, there's been some controversy around member items. The only source of funding for security enhancements in public housing is member items. And so when you're attacking member items, you're attacking the only source of funding for cameras and layered access control in our public housing developments.
Well, why is member items the only amount of funding? Why not a budget line for NYC?
I agree with you. I mean, we should have a dedicated funding stream for security cameras, for security intercoms, for security lighting in our public housing developments. It's a targeted tool for driving down the crime rate.
Well, since you cat's out the bag, since you brought it up, let's talk about member items. Let's talk about member items. Well, yeah, I mean, this is one of the differences between the council and the mayor.
I just defended it, yeah.
So that even in this era of good feeling, and you're all Democrats and you're all progressives and you're all pushing in the same direction, but the mayor has said he'd like to see member items funded at 0. right? What's the status of that conversation?
I don't believe that's going to happen. I think our speaker, Melissa Mark Viverito, has been very clear from day one that she believes, as do I believe all of us, in the power and the goodness of member items. We know our districts. There are small groups that we work with closely. We know they're on the ground making a difference in the people's lives in our district. They need funding. They rely on this funding. If we were to take away member items, many of those people would close shop. They would not be able to offer those services. So it's vitally important. I believe in it. I believe it's going to happen. I don't believe the mayor is going to stop this from happening. It's the right thing to do for New Yorkers, and I believe the council is united. We are working very closely with the mayor. We are all progressives, as David said, but there are some places where we will disagree in a professional and appropriate manner. This is clearly one of them.
What about, Margaret Chin, the argument that there's an ethics issue? One of your former colleagues, Dan Halloran, is on trial as we speak. And among the evidence that's being brought to court against him are wiretaps in which he says, look, I can control this amount of money, meaning member items, in exchange for a bribe.
Those are the bad apples, okay? But I think looking at all the council members, the funding that we give to senior centers, our public school, those are vital programs, and also our local cultural organization. They rely on that money to provide extra classes for our seniors, even to fix the gym floor in the school. So I think the discretionary funding is really important to our local groups.
Well, I mean, I could call out a bunch of names from Angel Rodriguez forward, and that's just sort of the modern era of member item corruption. Are there safeguards in place to your satisfaction?
Yeah, so I think there's two important points. The first is that corrupt elected officials are always going to be corrupt, and they'll find a way to sell their votes if they have to, because unfortunately there's always going to be a small percentage of people in every industry, whether it's lawyers, doctors, accountants, or politicians, who are corrupt. There's nothing we can do really to stop that. As far as the safeguards, we really have unprecedented amount of transparency. We have specific research that goes on to each and every single organization, and we account for it. It's in the exact budget. You know what we're spending on. And by the way, it's not that exciting. When we're talking about member items, we're talking about things like funding for domestic violence programs. We're talking about things like funding to keep our senior centers open. We're talking about things like autism. And really, we're focused on projects that would probably not see the light of day otherwise. So these projects overwhelmingly are good and are necessary. And little leagues, you're not going to have a little league in your district if you can't give them a few $1,000s to keep running. They're pretty vital.
Okay, we've got more to talk about on that topic and much more in just a minute, so stay put. We're going to be back with these council members in just a minute. Later on, we'll preview Wednesday's big congressional debate with 4 top spin doctors in our Monday Consultants Corner. Stay with us.